Here we go. All right.
I knew the macho.
What?
I knew the welcome everybody. Or is it me?
Oh, I'll do it. We're
Um,
live, but we can cut this. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Finally, another year is upon us of draft season. So it's really exciting. Andy and I are back for season number 2.
Welcome.
And we have a third amigo now with us. Kenny Rotuno is now joining the podcast. So it's an exciting time. We've got the gang together now. Kenny, happy to have you, and looking forward to this season and then hopefully future seasons.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I was around when you guys were doing the podcast last year, so I got to see how you went about it and following a lot more of the college football and the draft. So hopefully I'll be able to hang with you guys.
Yeah, and we'll be back on social media as always, and hopefully get an Instagram going. And that's done well with a couple podcasts that I have, another podcast that I'm doing, which has done well, and so that'll be cool, and you'll be able to follow us through that. And please share this with anyone who's interested in the draft. And obviously, that's how we get our marketing, because our student loans hold back the marketing budget. So we have just word of mouth right now, but hopefully we'll grow and we'll get better. We have a lot to dive into. Talking about our teams, I'm a Giants fan, as a reminder. Andy is the Patriots fan up in New England and Massachusetts, and Kenny is a Jets fan. So Andy, if you want to kick it off, because your team is the most successful, and then we'll go down the list with Kenny next with the Jets, and then me with the Giants. So start it up, man.
Yeah, just first off, I'm pumped to be back. Season 2, hopefully be bigger, better, all aspects on Twitter, better guests, better quality. It's going to be a good time.
Yep.
And we're recording this in between the divisional round, obviously, and the Pats play Saturday night. And it's been an interesting year. Some free agent signings haven't worked out. Gilmore's been off and on, but the team's there again at 13-3, some injuries. Obviously, the big talk is obviously Brady, Belichick, all that. There's rumors he's going to the Giants, but it looks like the Giants are getting his boy genius in Patricia, which I think will be a good hire. Overall, I think it could be a Super Bowl season, but I think if we do reach the game, NFC is tough this year. The Vikings, and especially I think the Falcons can get red hot, but it's looking positive for the Pats. Not a lot of rookie production. Obviously, Dietrich Wise and Adam Butler shine big time in sizable roles, 50% snaps, defensive tackle, defensive end. But other than that, we traded all our picks for Brandon Cooks, Mike Gillislee, all them. So it wasn't really an impactful rookie class, but that's what you kind of get with a veteran team aiming for a Super Bowl run.
Yeah, and you touched on it with the picks. It kind of made me just think right now about the Jimmy G trade in season, and what they got back in return.
Yeah, that's been the talk of the town. Obviously, pretty much everyone would agree we did not get enough. And now people arguing that they should trade Tom and stuff, and people losing their minds. The local radio here is nuts. Obviously, we didn't get enough. Belichick traded him to a good coach for cheaper. He didn't want to trade him to Cleveland. At this point, it is what it is, and you got to turn your head to the 2018 draft. You can't just keep looking on it. We need to find a successor now.
Yeah, and I think adding a little bit of fuel to the fire and kind of against the Pats in a way with that deal, in my view, is the Niners are winning. They're doing well. I mean, next year is obviously the pick. Is it this year or next year the pick, the second round pick?
2018 draft, and obviously, as you point out, Jimmy Garoppolo reeled off 5 straight wins, so that pick went from 33 to like 43.
Right, which is it's not that big of a jump, but it's enough, I think. Where you're getting a guy obviously who's normally, like you'd say, like a day one pick who may slip, like a Landon Collins was a 33rd pick overall.
Exactly.
All pro safety. I mean, but again, we talk about this all the time with the draft is, no one's a guarantee. No one is, in both sides of the coin, good and bad. So, we'll see with that. Kick it off to Ken, talk a little bit about the Jets and, your outlook on this past season and the season upcoming.
Definitely. I mean, everyone thought the Jets were going to be a complete mess. Probably a lot of people predicted not having a win for the entire year. I was one of them that was borderline thinking that might be the case. Obviously, exceeded expectations. I mean, McCown played out of his butt. I mean, was better than anyone could have expected him to be. But the biggest thing for me was, I know I was frustrated when they took Marcus May as the second safety in 2 picks in the draft, and he can attest for that. I was freaking out up at school.
I don't want a second safety.
Yeah, I was there and saw it. Weird, I could vouch to that 100%.
Yeah, I mean, and I still kind of feel that way. I wish we would have went a different direction, possibly, especially because the rest of the draft we really didn't get too much production out of.
Right.
I mean, obviously Elijah McGuire's interesting. I think he can be good, but he's just caught up in a mess in that backfield right now. I think as time goes on, you'll see him play a bigger role, and I think he's going to be actually a key part of this team with hopefully a rookie quarterback next year, but I don't want to get ahead of myself because knowing the Jets, they'll mess that up, and I really don't want to expect something that's not going to come, which I'm kind of used to by now. So,
yeah, I think with the Jets, I think that they're actually a couple pieces away from competing a little bit more. I think they're 5 wins this year, right?
Yeah.
So I think that you get a couple more pieces. They could be an 8-win team, 9-win team next year with a couple pieces. Like you said, that quarterback spot, I know we talked about it yesterday off air, but it's one of those things that you're kind of tired as a Jet fan, I think, of seeing these 1-year stopgaps and
tired's a nice word for it.
Yeah, I think you're kind of over that, and you kind of want to grow and move on with a guy who you're not. Maybe you don't want a who knows? Maybe you're not going to hit on a Carson Wentz type guy, or an Aaron Rodgers, but maybe who knows? Trying to think of a guy who maybe like a Teddy Bridgewater type. Maybe he's not a stud, but he'll get the job done.
I'm not looking for the next Hall of Fame quarterback. I'm looking for a guy that can potentially be that.
Sure.
But a guy that's going to be able to play day one.
Complete a check down.
What was that?
Complete a check down.
Right.
I mean, we kind of haven't had that for a while. So McCown was the best thing we've had in a couple of years now.
Yeah, and I think with McCown, he kind of reminds me of Fitzpatrick 2 years ago. It was, it was great. He had that great year, and then the next year they're just going to hopefully the Jets don't do this, but I could totally see them giving him another 1-year deal, and then he's obviously not what he was for them in the other year. So that'll definitely be interesting to see what they do at that position. And like I said, that they have some talent there. In regards to the Giants, obviously a very, very disappointing, turbulent year, uncharacteristic of the team on and off the field. Kind of honestly went to shambles. But I have faith in the organization that they will turn it around. It won't be something that will persist. Just from the stuff going towards the off the field argument stuff. So I think that'll obviously be nipped in the bud with the new head coach and the new GM. Gettleman doesn't take much crap, but obviously very disappointing season. They were a very, very underachieving team, to say the least. I think that as far as the rookies go, you got a lot of production out of Evan Ingram. He was, I would say, a top-tier rookie. Finally gave them a weapon at tight end. Wasn't terrible in the blocking game. Definitely, I would say, a little bit better than advertised. He's obviously not going to be, a Rhett Ellison who they have on the roster type blocker, but he'll get the job done. And obviously, he's very athletic and arguably one of the fastest guys on the team. Dalvin Tomlinson, very, very, very underrated, to say the least, at defensive tackle position. Was tops in the league amongst defensive rookies and amongst defensive players, actually, at the defensive tackle spot. So he was a bright spot. And then you got a couple other picks here and there that they did, they produced, but they weren't called upon as much. Wayne Gallman towards the end of the year got some carries and showed some flashes of what he did at Clemson. So, a little bit, couple more years of development with a couple guys. I think they'll be okay. Obviously, have to shore up that offensive line, and I think that they will be back to normal. And obviously, we'll talk a lot about the quarterback position when it comes to the Giants this upcoming draft, as that's likely talked about with them in connection to their team in that position. So, that's just a little bit about our teams and kind of the way that we see, the state of the franchise, I guess you'd say, state of the podcast right now. Moving on.
And yeah, just touching on that, the thing that's very fascinating about this season too, you touch on the quarterback position. I think there's a high likelihood the Pats, Jets, and Giants all pick a quarterback within the first 3 rounds. So that's going to be something awesome to talk about.
Sure, and I think, with the Pats, you can't really live with Brian Hoyer much longer as the backup. God forbid, Tom Brady does go down. In my opinion, obviously, besides that 1 year, he was out with the ACL, I think it was, against the Chiefs. He got hurt, was it?
Yeah.
A couple years back. I would say he's an Iron Man in his own right. You're pretty fortunate with him. And then, like you said, with the Jets, I think they'll take a quarterback within the first 2 rounds. I think they have to. Or if not, maybe sign somebody. Kirk Cousins is a free agent. Possibly Tyrod Taylor's available.
Just draft someone.
Case Keenum, all the quarterbacks on the Vikings. Pat Shermer's available. Who knows? Maybe Mike Zimmer's eye. Who knows what's going on?
Just draft someone. Let's stick with that.
Hackenberg was a good pick. So
all right, moving on.
Moving on to
letting assets on fire is always fun.
So we had the number 5 for Nick Saban this past week. He won the national championship against Georgia. So it's a tough year to be a sports fan in Georgia if you're a UGA fan and a Falcons fan.
They love to blow leads.
They blow leads, and I will say I think it's even worse for Georgia because that college football down south is basically like Christianity. It is a religion to them. I mean, is it not? I mean, and at home
and
they lost.
Home.
Right,
yep,
they lost in Mercedes-Benz. So you had that game. Curious to hear your guys' thoughts on it, and take it away, Andy.
Yeah, obviously from an entertainment standpoint, it definitely heated up once the freshman quarterback from Hawaii went into for Bama. He looks incredible, but obviously he's not draft eligible for 3 years. The game really picked up there. And then from a prospect standpoint, Bama's loaded. Darren Payne wrecked the game from defensive tackle. He looks awesome. Ronnie Harrison looks like a player. Fitzpatrick. You got Bo Scarborough on offense. But the guy I really like, and he's projected like mid-round right now, is ironically, their one player who was a walk-on, Levi Wallace, the corner.
Yeah.
I just think he led the SEC, I think, in pass breakups. He always gets his hand on the ball. He's physical. You can tell he plays with that chip on his shoulder.
Yeah.
And I know he's not the most flashy Bama prospect to talk about, but I'm excited for him and see if he can do anything at the combine. I like his story.
I agree. I like Levi a lot. I was watching him during the game pretty close just because I knew that stat as well. He was thrown at quite a bit. Obviously, when you have Minka and that secondary, but I like Daron Payne as well. And unfortunately, Damian Harris isn't coming out. But Kenny, we talked about that. Quite a bit of running backs will be in this draft, so maybe he saw a little bit of a threat to his draft stock in that sense.
I actually kind of think it was a good move by him. I mean, obviously, running backs come out every year, but trying to come out with, you look at Georgia alone with 2 running backs who they might not be the top 2 running backs, and I think they're ahead of him in my eyes.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually a smart move, and hopefully next year he'll be able to really improve his draft stock. I know he's obviously a great prospect now, but I think next year, hopefully a couple less running backs, and he'll be able to jump up a couple rounds.
Yeah, the curious case of Nick Chubb, he kind of was a top 5 pick, talked about last year, and then he obviously got the injury, and then he kind of never really was the same, and Sony Michel has kind of taken over there, even not even so much to them splitting the carries. I think he's just kind of – Sony Michel is the I think he'll be the next big thing coming out of Georgia. In my eyes, they kind of remind me of those 2 guys are like a Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara duo, where now Mark Ingram's kind of overshadowed in New Orleans, but he's still producing. But Nick Chubb is an interesting take. Kenny, what else do you have to say about the game?
I thought the game was one of the more entertaining games. Obviously, the last 2 years have been ridiculous. Anything with that Alabama has been in recently. I'm not an Alabama fan. I actually root against them a lot of the times, but they produce, and if they lose, they make it a great game, obviously, like against Clemson. But I was actually just thinking about Harris, and you got to remember now, teams aren't going to stack the box as much because it's not going to be Jalen Hurts. Yeah. They actually have a guy that can throw it, so maybe he'll open up some more holes, even though as hard as it is for that to believe. But
yeah,
I think it's going to be so much easier for him with a guy who can actually throw the ball at quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with that. And talking about Georgia, the state of Georgia, and Jalen Hurts, I think a good system for him to get into would be maybe Georgia Tech.
Definitely.
That's a good. Yeah, I like that.
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, he's basically a halfback. And he still could throw it. There's no doubt about it. He could still throw the football better than a lot of quarterbacks who've been at Georgia Tech. He comes from a good program.
He's not a QB prospect, so I think the best thing for him to do is find a spot that improves his stock as hopefully a running back in his eyes.
Right, and I think that's exactly what he projects at the next level, if at all, if he makes it to the next level. Typical Bama quarterback in my eyes. But, I guess we'll see what happens. And obviously Tua has been, obviously a big bright spot, and both those guys were a class act. One guy I want to talk about in the national championship game who was all over the field this whole year, linebacker from Georgia, Roquan Smith. He's by far, I think he was my favorite prospect because he's talked about, but he's not talked about like Minkah Fitzpatrick was, or, Daron Payne gets a lot of, publicity, of course, and I like Daron Payne, but Roquan Smith he's your starting middle linebacker, and he's a stud special teams guy for you. And you get that in college, obviously, but he's a special athlete. He's all over the place.
He can step in day one. He covered the entire field. On the one play I remember specifically, there was an out. I think it was an out pattern that was thrown, and he was in the middle of the field.
Yeah,
the guy had like 3 yards to get after he caught it, and he completely stonewalled him right before the first down marker and made them punt. And I was just wowed by that play.
And he reminds Georgia puts out some good linebackers. Alec Ogletree, Thomas Davis. They've had their fair share of quality linebackers, and I think he'll be the next one in line. And Kirby Smart's going to be missing him. Did he declare yet? Is he 100% declared?
I'm not completely sure, but I assume he's coming out.
I'm sure he'll come out with just the way his stock is. So, any other takeaways from the draft? From the national title game with the draft?
Yeah, to Roquan Smith, I agree. Barring an injury to him or another Marshawn Lattimore type cornerback entering the league, he should be the rookie of the year. He'll start 90% of the snaps. He'll be a borderline Pro Bowler, absolute beast. I agree. But better Reuben Foster, more stout, the point of attack. And then to touch on the running backs, it is interesting. Michel's made a ton of money recently. I've seen him in the late first in mocks. And conversely, Nick Chubb obviously has fallen to the late second, third, because he just doesn't look the same as he used to pre-injury. But I would just say, obviously, second year after ACL, I just think this guy's a completely safe prospect. He reminds me a little of Corey Dillon, Frank Gore. I'm a big fan of him for the Pats, and a team that just wants a power running back who can take that 250, 300 carries. I think you'll get a value late. I know he doesn't look the same now, but you just got to give him that time.
And one guy that I actually was interested in, I mentioned it to Andy before the game. Obviously we all know about Calvin Ridley, but
sure, yeah.
His brother really stepped up, Riley, in that game, and I was curious if you guys thought, his year wasn't exactly great, but he's an interesting prospect, not this year, but possibly next year. For me, obviously, just being Calvin Ridley's brother should help him a little bit to be drafted, and I think he has the tools as well.
Yeah, bloodlines obviously, help out, and when you perform like the way he did in that kind of game, that not only fuels the conversation about the guy, but it also helps his confidence for the future, for the next year. Maybe he becomes obviously the number one target for Fromm. That's definitely an interesting point. I think Riley Ridley is a very good receiver for them, and hopefully next year he'll continue to emerge as a threat. So, Andy, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, he's a sophomore, so not draft eligible. He'll come back next year. If he can start, obviously get that receiver one role. Malcolm Mitchell came out of Georgia with limited production, but those Georgia receivers definitely, AJ Green could go down the list. They definitely make an impact at the next level.
Sure. Yeah, and talking about the quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts and Tua, obviously stepped in the second half, played really well, and Fromm had an amazing first half. And obviously people were talking about that draft class now is going to be a special one, especially the kid from Clemson is in that draft class, I believe, as well. If they all come out at the same time. So that'll be very interesting. But it wouldn't be a draft episode number 1 if we didn't talk about the quarterbacks. And one guy I think that we all kind of wanted to talk about was Sam Darnold. Was it the right choice for him to come out? Do you guys think that is he the next USC quarterback bust, or is he going to be the next franchise quarterback for a franchise?
I'll step in here. The biggest thing for me with him is it all depends on the team he gets drafted by and the system he has to play. And I could see him.
I agree with that.
If he gets drafted to a team with weapons and just a solid team that he doesn't have to be Superman, I think he can be a really, really good quarterback in the NFL. However, if he goes to a team, obviously, the Browns have some weapons, but they just are where QBs go to die, it seems like. And if he gets put in a situation like that, he does force a lot of passes, which worries me. He probably will throw a good amount of interceptions his rookie year, force some passes, and I think depending on the situation is going to be how he performs, obviously.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I think Sam Darnold, obviously, he's still a little young. Obviously, like we talked about, the right time for him to come out, not only side of production, but just age and experience in college. I think a team that may be beneficial for him would be a team that, of course you could sit here and say like the Vikings, but the Vikings aren't going to get a chance to draft him, right? Like a good defense, good offensive line, but a team that intrigues me, I think for him, believe it or not, and it just kind of popped into my head, Kenny, while you're talking, because I agree with a lot of your points, is the Miami Dolphins. Only because I think that they're going to be in a spot where they obviously need a quarterback. Jay Cutler is going to be hopefully in the booth for all our sakes. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of him. Tannehill, you don't really know what you're going to get him coming back from injury. And, there's been rumors in the past that they don't like him as much, as that franchise guy. They have a fairly decent offensive line. Kenyon Drake emerged for the run game to help him out. And their defense wasn't terrible either. So, I think that they're one of those like sleeper teams. And I think they're a sleeper destination for him, especially with Adam Gase, who does a good job with creating an offense and developing quarterbacks. I think that would be an interesting fit for him. But I think it was the right choice for him. I think, especially when Rosen declared like 10 minutes later, it just seemed like one of those things that they're going to be those two guys. It's going to be like a Jeter, Nomar Garcia-Parra, or, LeBron James and I don't know who's another guy or Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade. Like they're just like they're draft class rivals, Ben, Eli, and Phillip, So it'll be talked about with those guys a lot,
especially
attached to the hip.
Both from LA,
right,
or LA schools
right,
at least, and
it
just so much connecting them, and everyone was comparing them throughout the years, or this year especially, and then after last year, obviously going up against Penn State, all of a sudden Sam Darnold had that huge game and which really put him on the map. And I think it's going to be interesting to see which one prevails in that matchup.
Yeah, I agree. Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously, in my opinion, you can't go back to school if you're projected to be a top 5 pick. You risk injury, you risk Matt Barkley syndrome where you go back, you get exposed. It's happened to numerous quarterbacks, Taj Boyd, Brad Kaya this year. You get hyped as a top pick and then more film on you, you look worse. So I'm a fan of Sam Darnold, but obviously if you're a top 5 pick, you got to enter while the iron is hot. One thing that is concerning, obviously, is I read that he'll be the second youngest quarterback in the history of the NFL since the merger to start. I think he'll be barely 21 when he plays. So, like I said, I agree with Ken on most of his points and you, Matt, that he needs a team that has good surroundings because he's so young. He's prone to turnovers, but you see that flash. You see his offensive line was a sieve, and he can maneuver the pocket. He throws his big-time throw percentage, I think, is maybe the best in the class. Like, he has those 3 wild plays a game that you can see why he's ranked so highly. But he needs time to sit, I think, for maybe a season. But I don't think he's going to get it.
I agree. I don't think he'll get it. And I know, Matt, as a Giants fan, you don't want them to take a quarterback. But could that be almost a best of both worlds perfect situation for Sam Darnold? Not necessarily the Giants, but for Darnold, I think fits a learn under Eli, hopefully doesn't have to play year one.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where I was getting at, even like with the Dolphins, just because like as a Giant fan, I don't think that you need a quarterback, but obviously I see the attachment there with those, the franchise and the player. Looking at a team like the Dolphins again, they may be quicker to move on from Ryan Tannehill more so than the Giants with Eli. But I agree with Darnold. I think there's no doubt about it. He needs to sit a little bit. Whether that's 8 games or 16 or whatever it is.
Or the first half like Watson.
Yeah, right. Yeah, of course. So, it'll be an interesting thing what happens with him. And, I do think the Giants would be a good spot for him. Though. I don't know if necessarily it would be for the Giants. Again, I'm not too big on anyone going to the Giants for a quarterback, but we'll get into that with, as we go on, moving on and talking about, the draft. And Andy, one thing I wanted to touch on real quick, and we'll move on to the next topic is, you said, like guys, when they stay in school, we tend to have more film on them and overanalyze. And that's one thing that, we're all guilty of, and all analytics and people who review the draft and study the draft is, more things we look at, the more time we have, we overanalyze. So paralysis by overanalysis, right? So they say that all the time, and we'll be guilty of that. We've been guilty of that. And we'll touch on that a little bit later on also with our rookies from this past year, who we hit on, who we missed on, and stuff like that. So, moving on, I think, if you guys want to talk about a little bit about like what we think about this class as a whole, I think that would be important to kind of convey to the audience, and then we'll move on. So Andy, we'll start with you.
Are we talking about a year in review for the rookies this year or the upcoming draft class?
Just the upcoming class, and then we'll touch on the
So just a brief overview. I think obviously the quarterback class dating back 6 months ago was mega hyped to be one of the best ever. And while it's tough to live up to that expectation, I'm very bullish on this quarterback class. I know a lot of analysts aren't, but I love Josh Rosen as a day one starter. He can be a franchise quarterback. I know people wonder about his whole mental makeup, but I think that's nonsense. So I like quarterback. I like Sam Darnold. I think Baker Mayfield and obviously Lamar Jackson are very intriguing guys that could become all pros or could not fizzle out. They're just high risk. And then Josh Allen we'll have plenty of shows to dissect him. One of the more interesting prospects ever. And then regarding other positions, I think cornerback is definitely deep. You have Josh Jackson, Alexander, Denzel Ward, just a lot of guys who can be number one corners. I think running back obviously is the deepest it's ever been, even deeper than last year. Might not have the top level talent of a McCaffrey, Fournette, Cook, but you could go to RB15. You have Akram Wiley from Iowa, and it's just loaded. Edge rushers average, and I think obviously the story of the draft will be the quarterback position. That will be talked about the most. They'll have the most intrigue, but it's a well-rounded class. I wouldn't say it's the most talented or a bad talent like the 2013 class, but it'll get the job done.
Yeah, I think this class is a very average class.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, it's the NFL draft. You're going to get guys that you're going to hit on, miss on, sleepers, overachievers, underachievers, like anything. But like you said, Andy, to a lot of your points, I think it's a very deep draft in the sense of average, where you're going to get guys who are going to come in and be able to play for clubs and to produce some. I think, again, you won't get that top-end talent. I don't really see a position where you're like, wow, and it almost, top 10 guys could all be, within the top 2 rounds. We've seen that in the past couple of years with receivers or, I actually, believe it or not, I tend to like the offensive line class in this draft. What a surprise coming from me, but that's just one thing I study a lot and watch. But I think has a lot of talent. I think last year's class obviously had a lot of talent as well. And I think it's a little bit one of those positions that you're able to kind of evolve a little bit in, and it's a little bit easier of a transition from the college game to the pro game. And I think that's another thing that I wanted to talk about too, is just that, we see it all the time with college into the pro. The transition is because the college game is not going to change for the pro game, and the pro game is not going to change for the college game. So I have one more quick point about that, but I'll let Kenny talk about, his thoughts on the class.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you guys said, deep is probably the best word to describe this class. Running back in particular for me is, you can go, like Andy said, all the way down to RB15. I mean, he said Wadley, but you also have Jackson from Northwestern, who has been tearing it up now for 2 years, and I don't think really gets what he deserves. I think the recognition he deserves. But obviously the QB class, I think it's going to be – QB actually is the one position I think that isn't as deep as we thought it would be. A lot of guys that we thought would declare aren't declaring.
Sure.
And I think that hurts a lot of the teams looking for a backup similar to like the Patriots, maybe the Giants, or the Dolphins, like you said. If they're not looking for a guy day one, there's a lot of teams that will jump at the opportunity to draft a QB that can start day one for them this year.
It also hurts the depth in that position.
Exactly.
And the quality of that class, yeah.
Exactly. But the one position I'm actually kind of disappointed by, I like to follow them a lot, but I've been disappointed going into the draft, is wide receiver this year.
Yeah.
I really think it's a lacking class. You have some guys that can be great. I mean, obviously, I think Ridley is going to be a stud, but other than that, I don't see a can't miss prospect at receiver. You have Washington from Oklahoma State, who people love. I'm personally not super high on him, and then like Cortland Sutton from SMU, who I think you're going to see. I just don't think he's fast enough. He's a big body.
He's Laquan Treadwell 2.0, in my opinion. That's what I'd say about him.
Yeah, I'm just disappointed in the wide receiver class, and especially with what we thought was so many great quarterbacks in college football this year, the wide receiver class seems to be lacking for me.
Yeah, and one thing, like I said, I wanted to touch on real quick, and we'll move on. Obviously, is we talk a lot about the quarterback position, like you said, and Josh Allen. Andy, you brought him up. A lot of people will talk about his lack of production this year. And they're kind of surprised because they use the excuse that, or the reason of the level of competition, in that division is very weak out in the Mountain West in Wyoming. And, I think that's a really bad argument, as we've seen over the years, because we talked about that ad nauseum 2 years ago with Carson Wentz, who played 1AA ball, which is supposedly technically worse, right? So, and he's got the job done. Obviously, he performed very well, but still, I think level of competition has really nothing to do with it when you're talking about a Division I guy. Because I think Division I's Division I. Wyoming, Boise State, Utah's in the Pac-12, but all those schools out west, they're maybe not the best. They're not the SEC, especially defensively, but they're still high caliber athletes. And listen, the guy's he has the potential, and it's interesting. But one thing I wanted to touch on: the Chicago Bears hired Matt Nagy as their head coach, and he's bringing over a lot of college coaches. He's bringing over Mark Helfrich, who is the Oregon head coach, to be his offensive coordinator, and Harry Hiestand, one of the best offensive line coaches in college football from Notre Dame. And I find that interesting. And one of the things, and I tweeted this, but talking about the game evolving and changing for the college game, I think it's kind of smart what Matt Nagy is doing, because he realizes who he has at quarterback. He has a young college, one-year guy in Mitchell Trubisky, who did very well in UNC and, produced in that offense, which is a college-based offense. And I think what they're doing is they're trying to make the merge a little easier for him, to make him more comfortable with college-like schemes and designs, play design. So I think that's really interesting, and kind of wanted to hear you guys' take on that. And I personally think that's what the goal is, but I'm interested to see what you have to say. So, Andy, what do you think?
What are we talking about? It'll be edited.
We'll cut this. No, I was talking about Matt Nagy bringing over Mark Helfrich from Oregon as to be the offensive coordinator, Harry Hiestand to be the offensive line coach. And I was saying, like, it's going to, help out Mitch Trubisky, because that's what he's used to.
Yeah, even if we don't edit this out, it'd be great for the fans. It's the Bears. Obviously, it just went over my head. They're just a very forgettable team. And I think to that point, they need an injection of, I don't want to say explosion, but like something that can get that team energized. Like offensively, John Fox is an awful coach. They have no identity. They try to pound Jordan Howard and have no weapons. I think with Helfrich, at least, they'll run an up-tempo pace. Trubisky is a good athlete, especially throwing on the run, so I think that's a good fit.
Yeah, for me, it's just I think the fit is good, but I'm worried because it seems like whenever a lot of these college coaches come over to the NFL, try and bring their scheme, and it's almost just like a gimmick.
Chip Kelly.
Exactly. So it works for a year, maybe 2 years, and then teams start to know how to defend it, and they have the talent now on the defensive end to stop that type of offense, whereas a lot of college teams do not. And it ends up not working. They end up going back to college to coach, and it works for a year or two. And unless you have just excellent talent offensively, which the Bears I don't think do, I just don't see it panning out. Maybe it helps Trubisky this year, but from after that, I don't really think it's that smart of a move.
Yeah. So, moving on. Kind of wanted to talk about the guys that we had in this past draft, who we've hit on, we've missed on, kind of our thoughts on that, and just curious to hear you guys' thoughts. So, Ken, why don't you go? And unless you don't want to, because you're the
No,
new guy.
No, I'll start because obviously I have less defined takes because you guys were on it last year. For me, I'll start with one of the guys that I think I missed on, and it was Deshaun Watson. I didn't think he was going to be a mess, but I thought he was more of just a winner and didn't have the tools that he flashed in his couple games in the NFL. And I think he really exceeded expectations. Obviously, I think he exceeded everybody's expectations, but I didn't see that coming from him. I didn't even see half of that coming from him. I thought he would be an okay quarterback that just kind of found a way to win, but wasn't especially talented. I mean, it helps having Hopkins and Fuller when he can fly down the field, which kind of fit when he was evading pressure. But Watson was definitely one of the guys that was exceeded expectations that I probably missed on. But definitely another guy that I thought exceeded expectations. I mean, we all thought he was going to be great, but he even further exceeded expectations was Marshawn Lattimore with the Saints. I mean, we knew he was a top prospect. Everybody knew he was a top prospect, best cornerback in the draft, and yet he steps in day one, and now he's in the argument of best quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah.
And to me, stepping day one from college to the pro level and being able to perform like he can, I think no matter what, he exceeded expectations as high as you could have been on him.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's no doubt about it. It's interesting too, like reviewing this, because it just goes to show how sometimes the draft and our analysis is just like everyone else's. You know, I think no one's a professional at this, although they call themselves professionals, because at the end of the day, it comes down to guys who produce. And, you know, talk about Kareem Hunt. I know, Kenny, you had tons of success with him in fantasy, but and a lot of people did, I'm sure, as well. But you know, here's a guy who comes from you know, Toledo.
Yep.
Right. So the 3rd round pick. And you know, he did really well at the Senior Bowl, and that's where I found out about him, to be honest with you. But that'll be interesting too, watching the Senior Bowl, Shrine Game, a couple of other of these things moving forward, and obviously the Combine. So
yeah, you have the 2 QB prospects in Allen and Mayfield who are actually going to be at the Senior Bowl, which adds even more intrigue. You would think prospects that are projected to go that high wouldn't risk playing in this game, but I think it's going to be fun to watch, and they have a lot to prove.
Well, and that's it. And it's an opportunity for those guys to go out and to, you know, be with the other seniors. And sometimes it's like they want to do it for a last hurrah, and they want to get in front of the pro guys a little earlier than most. So it'll definitely be interesting. Andy, what are your takes on, you know, hits and misses from this past year?
I definitely agree with Ken. Although I was a fan of Watson, had him 19th overall. Obviously, I wasn't sold on him completely. I thought his game had a lot of rough edges, especially accuracy-wise. So he came in and he obviously took the show over with 19 touchdowns in 7 games. But my biggest miss, I would say, obviously, is Juju Smith-Schuster. I wrote him off mostly as like your typical mid-round, 3rd-round type receiver prospect who
possessions receiver. I thought.
Possession receiver. Can be a number 2, number 3, won't really take over a game. The Steelers took him in the high 2nd, and as a Pats fan, my first reaction is to laugh. You guys have Brian and Antonio Brown. What are you doing? It just shows, obviously, these guys are experts. They get paid the big bucks in Pittsburgh. They kill the receiver draft. And he just looks to me, he's way faster than I thought. Explosive for his size. I think he can be a number 1 receiver. And honestly, I think Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster can be one of the best tandems in a long time next year and years to come. I think he's going to be a problem, especially come playoff time.
Yeah, I agree. Any guys that you think you hit on, or?
Yeah, one guy I definitely say I was higher than probably nearly anybody was Desmond King. I had him as a top 15 pick on my board, and he fell all the way to the 5th round, mostly because of height. And they thought he played in a zone scheme at Iowa, but he had the natural man instincts. And while he wasn't the best corner in the draft, obviously, he stepped in for the Chargers after Verrett got hurt. He looks like at most an elite, at least an elite slot corner. I think he can be more. Just a great tackler, great instincts, and the Chargers got a steal in the 5th round.
Yeah, and I think the fit is good for him there with Gus Bradley as the D coordinator. coming over from Seattle for those years, and it's very similar to that aspect. So, yeah, Des King is one of those guys I know you were always high on, and he's played very well for the Chargers. For me, a hit and a miss. As far as a hit goes, I was very high on both my guys are offensive linemen that I'm going to talk about, and then I'll talk a little bit about Evan Ingram, who obviously is a Giants fan. I saw a lot of, but a hit for me, I always loved Pat Eiflon from Ohio State. He came into the Vikings right away, seamlessly started for them, can play guard and play center, obviously, is what he's doing for them now. Took over for the veteran John Sullivan. And he's obviously paved the way for them to be where they are now in the playoffs and hopefully make another run in the NFC. Did a great job with Dalvin Cook while he was there for the short time he was, and now Latavius Murray and McKinnon, and obviously doing a great job with Case Keenum, not knowing really who your quarterback was at the time. I think he's done a really, really good job. He's been one of the top rookies and very underrated, obviously, as an offensive lineman and as a center. He was always a sure thing, I thought, but a lot of people didn't like him because he was undersized. And again, offensive linemen are usually overlooked unless they're a top 5 talent at offensive tackle position. So he'll be my hit. And then the guy I missed on, Cam Robinson from Alabama, who went to Jacksonville. I never really was a big fan of Cam Robinson. He kind of saw him go in waves up and down. I thought he was a little too inconsistent, but he's done a really good job protecting Blake Bortles' blind side in Jacksonville. And again, another playoff caliber team who's getting tons of contributions from him, and he's doing really well in the run game and a lot more physical than I thought he would be. So he's doing well. And then, like I said, touch on Evan Ingram real quick. A lot of people I'm sure who listen to this saw my reaction to that pick. I wasn't very happy like I was with Eli Apple, but I guess I'm 1 for 2, batting 500 in those reactions. Evan Ingram obviously did a really good job, like we talked about, and I think he'll be a bright spot for the future. So,
if you actually don't mind, I have a guy that I wanted to talk about that I know is all three of us I know we're high on, but I know Andy and I especially were high on him. Was McCaffrey. Obviously, didn't have the yards per carry that everyone would have hoped, but I mean, he's so diverse where he's opened up that offense, even with Cam, who seems like the offense was open enough as it was. But I mean, he's essentially a receiver.
Yeah.
That'll go play running back. If Cam could make a short throw like any other quarterback, he would have had, I think, a dominant year. But Cam loves to overthrow guys that seem to be running short, and
loves to show off his arm strength.
Yeah, so I definitely think that hurt McCaffrey's production. But I think that personally, I'm still super high on. I think he's such a great prospect, and I think he just brings so much to the table. And I think I'd like to hear your guys' opinions on him. I know we were high on him, but after this year, what you're thinking?
Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was a mega fan of him. Obviously, had him, I think, 4th overall on my board. I think he's a complete weapon. He didn't disappoint in Carolina. Obviously, it's more so to the fact you'll agree that if he was on another team like the Saints, the Patriots, the Packers, you go down the list, he would have exploded, in my opinion. He was with the quarterback, as you say, who's just not a short, accurate passer, and he still had 80 receptions, which is absurd. You could have pushed that number up to 100 with Drew Brees or someone like that. And I just think, I know people are talking, well, they got Kamara in the 3rd round, so McCaffrey is going to be a waste at the 9th. But I just think he's going to keep developing as a receiver. You saw that option in route he did in the playoff game against the Saints, burnt his linebacker, then took it 60 yards. I love the ceiling for this kid. I think he's like Wes Welker that can play running back. I'm in love.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, I liked him more and more as the process went on. I think, Ken, what you touched on, the way that he was utilized, it is kind of not on him. I think obviously he didn't meet the standards of the hype, but I think that's because look at what happened. I mean, they fired their offensive coordinator, Mike Shula. So I think obviously that has to play a role in it. Maybe they weren't really happy with how he was utilized. I think he was utilized well, but not well enough, if that makes sense. Like you said, Kenny is a slot receiver. He ran the ball some. But yeah, I think he could be utilized, even take the next step next year and be at another level where we all thought he would be coming out of Stanford. So,
and it just the one play that to me just shows how valuable he is was the play where someone was calling out that it's that wheel route, and Cam looks at him and is like, "Oh, you would have thought," or something like that, and he goes, "Watch this," and he runs that little in route against the linebacker. Cam throws it to him for a touchdown, and it just like the defense is so worried about him, and he's part of every play where they're making sure they have him covered because he's so explosive.
Yeah, even the play against the Saints when he was like a little slant and 56 yards, to the house. So
there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stats you can't measure with him. Plays you can't measure in stats. Like you say, in the Pats game, the Panthers beat us early in the year. I think 7 Patriots went to the side of McCaffrey. 7. The whole defense flooded that way. And then Fozzie Whitaker had a walk-in touchdown any of us could have scored. So he definitely, as opposed to a Fournette who's just more of a pounder, McCaffrey definitely takes a focus of a defensive game plan.
Sure. And then real quick to finish up the episode, we have some head coaching openings. I know you guys weren't really prepared for this segment, but I figured I'd throw it in and throw a little wild card at you guys. There are some openings still. So I'm curious to get your predictions on where we're at, who's going to go where, and we'll look forward to the divisional round this week and see you guys next week. But curious to get this last segment in.
Yeah, so that's a good segment. As Ian Rappaport just tweeted a few minutes ago that Panthers defensive coordinator Steve Wilks has no plan to interview with the Colts. They are focusing on offensive candidates. And I think that's a clear tip that at this point, it's really a lot of Patriots reporters are saying it's Indianapolis a bust for McDaniels. And I think he is going to bite at that job. Just the chance to coach Andrew Luck, you got to gamble he's healthy. And I know the owner's crazy, Irsay, but he stays out of football matters. McDaniels will have a good relationship with Ballard. I think that duo of him and Luck will be a good one. And then I do think Patricia is bound for New York. Those crazy rumors about Belichick, they'll have to settle for the young whiz rocket scientist. I think he'll definitely bring his giving up a few points to the Giants. They won't blitz as much. It'll be a very sound defense. If he goes there, I think Giants fans will be pleased.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I agree. I had the same guys going to the same places as Andy, and it just, to me, it isn't much of a surprise when teams do well and have success like the Patriots have had. Naturally, the OC and the defensive coordinator get taken as a head coach somewhere, and
sure.
It may be frustrating as a Patriots fan. I know Andy and a couple of his buddies that I've been in touch with are like, why do people keep going after our guys? But when you have that kind of success, it's kind of just the natural progression to then give them a chance at the head coaching position somewhere in the NFL. And I think they're both going to do really well with their respective spots, assuming they go where we say they're going.
So we have the Cardinals. So who do you think gets the Cardinals job?
Honestly, I don't even know the Cardinals job that much. I know that the Pats linebackers coach is interviewed there. Who has Pat Shurmur interviewed there?
He has. Yeah, he has.
I think I've read that. I think that makes sense for him, honestly. He can pick the next quarterback. That Arizona team is just, they're going to enter a big rebuild phase. Carson Palmer's retired. Larry Fitz will probably follow suit. The defense is old. They're the oldest team in the NFL. So whatever coach is coming in there needs to be there for the long haul, and also a quarterback whisperer.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned the whole Bears thing where they're bringing in this, hopefully, a bunch of energy and rejuvenating the team. And with what seems to be a rebuild, hopefully going younger, kind of tough to go older there, but hopefully going younger, maybe do the same thing, bring an injection of energy, maybe a coach that no one's expecting, but can he fits with the players that they're hoping to get and the way they're kind of moving.
Yeah, I think for me, the Cardinals wouldn't be surprised. Pat Shurmur, obviously, like you said, Andy, a dark horse candidate that I see. Personally, he hasn't really been rumored there, but he's been rumored on his way out of Seattle. His defensive coordinator, Chris Richard, he's been, one of those guys that, there was rumors about Todd Bowles maybe coming back there, Mike Vrabel, defensive guys. I think you kind of get that with Chris Richard. He's a younger guy, very well thought of as a head coaching candidate, and it seems to be on his way out of Seattle, just like Darrell Bevell was. So I think that'd be my guy in Arizona. And in Indianapolis, I would not be surprised if McDaniels takes over there. That's just my gut instinct. Kenny, what about you in Indianapolis?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I agreed with Andy, having the two Patriots coordinators go into the Colts and the Giants. I think it's just a natural fit, and it's time that they got their shot.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think the only thing that would scare me as a Giants fan is if Shermer goes to the Cardinals, Patricia goes to the Lions, and then McDaniels goes to the Colts. Because then at that point, you're really left with Steve Wilks, who isn't even one of your big three now, as it's wired down to those three. But apparently, Gettleman's relationship with him is very good, and he has some interest in bringing on John DeFilippo, the Eagles quarterback coach, as his OC. So that would be interesting. But my guy is Patricia. I've said it from the outset that I think he would be the next guy I'd want, just because of how smart he is and all the things you're hearing. He could be a GM, and obviously he's learned from the best. So that's my take on it. And with that, I think that's episode number 1. Any final thoughts, anyone?
Yeah, we'll touch on it again, obviously, going all through the year. I'm excited about this draft even more so than last year. All our teams might pick a quarterback. The QB class has a lot of interesting personalities, talents. And obviously, we started out earlier this year, so maybe next episode we'll be previewing the title games and the Super Bowl. So that'll also be a good wrinkle into our podcast as well. Look forward to those teams and what they'll need for the draft.
Definitely. And thanks for having me join. Obviously, I'm good friends with you guys, and I missed out last year with you two doing it, and happy I can provide a little bit of insight.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's exciting that we have Ken joining us this year, and hopefully you guys stay locked to the podcast and listen in each week, whether that's talking about the college game, the pro game, the draft, obviously the Senior Bowls coming up, and our analysis moving forward. So for Kenny and Andy, Matt Genatino, and we will see you guys next week.
See you.